Okay, well, my name is Arlene McDonald, and I'm here interviewing Dr. JoAnn Manson, and I'm delighted to be with her. She is the 2022 winner of the Alma Morani Renaissance Woman in Medicine Award, which is given by the Women in Medicine Legacy Foundation every year to an outstanding woman in medicine. And as part of that award, we do an oral history series with our award winners. And so it is a terrific honor to be spending time with JoAnn Manson and hearing a little bit about her life in medicine. Our interview today is taking place on August the 7th, and it is late in the afternoon. Dr. Manson is in Boston in her office, and I will just let anyone know just a little bit of background about you and where our talks are going to go.
Wonderful to talk with you, Arlene.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Manson is a physician, epidemiologist, endocrinologist, and one of the most cited women researchers in science. She has been a prolific contributor to our knowledge of women's health, a co-PI or a PI in many of the landmark studies in women's health. She has a strong commitment to preventative healthcare and has led large randomized clinical prevention trials of nutritional and lifestyle factors related to heart disease, cancer, diabetes. And even beyond research, she is really a population health leader who's written scores of popular books and advice columns in magazines, translating scientific findings on preventative health to a general population. So she very much has a very high profile in many worlds, and those are the worlds we're going to explore with her over the next series of interviews. Just to give her formal titles, which I should really do, she is currently the Michael and Lee Bell Professor of Women's Health at Harvard Medical School. She is also a professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and she is the chief of the Division of Preventive Medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. So that is quite an introduction because this is a life of great achievements, and I would love to start exploring how we came to be the person you are today that we're talking with. And normally in these interviews, we usually just like to start with your beginnings, where you were born, how you grew up, where your interest in medicine was fostered, things like that. So I'll just let you take it. Tell us a little bit about that, beginnings.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm originally from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and came from a middle income, middle class kind of household in Cleveland Heights, went to a large public elementary school, middle school, high school. And we have a large family, 5 children in my family. Actually was the 4th of 5 children.
Okay.
And you know, it was actually very lovely growing up in that area. There were a lot of opportunities to go to art museums, to take, art class. I was really interested in art for a long time, art and sculpture, and I went to art museums and spent a lot of time taking art classes, taking some dance, modern dance, ballet, and there was a lot of opportunities for culture. My family, my siblings and I were very close. My parents, my father was an aerospace aeronautical engineer at NASA, National Association of Space Administration. And my mother was originally a social worker, but after the children came, she stopped working in social work and was a stay-at-home mom. My parents really valued education. That was like one of the most important things to them, and often, told us that they were making sure that money, there would be enough savings for, for education for all the children. And so I always put a really high priority on being serious about school, you know, trying to
Right.
look as much as I could in school, and was kind of looking forward to an opportunity to go to college and have higher education.
Were all your siblings of, that dedicated to education and
Yeah,
thinking that way, or were you?
my siblings were all, you know, good students. It definitely would have been hard for me not to have been serious about school, though there were times when I got a little rebellious about, you know, does everyone in the family have to follow this very academic route? Anyway, I had you know, all my siblings went to good schools. At the time I was applying to college, I had two older siblings who were at Yale. I had a sibling who had just graduated from the University of Michigan. And so I kind of took a different path and went to Harvard Radcliffe at that time. And you know, at the time I attended, I was really, you know, two separate, somewhat separate schools. Even the classes were co-ed, but the application was to Radcliffe College. There was a 4-to-1 ratio of males to females.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and eventually I was there at a time. I graduated in 1975, so we're about to celebrate the 50th reunion. Or next year we'll be celebrating the 50th reunion. The school eventually became like gender blind admission, but
Right.
when I was applying, there were only 300, about 300 women, about 1,200 men. You know, it was
Wow.
yeah, it was like a 4-to-1 ratio, but it eventually, over the next few years, became there was parity in terms of males and females, and it became gender blind admission. So it really changed quite a bit, even while I was there. From the
Okay.
very beginning, the courses were co-ed. Um,
Right.
but the living arrangements changed, you know, women, when I was there the first year, they lived at Radcliffe, in the Radcliffe dormitories, and then could move to the Harvard houses, um, you know, on the main campus near Harvard Square. But you said you hadn't been in Boston, so I don't have to give you too many details about this. But it changed quite a bit over the course of the years I was in college. And then
Oh,
gradually, after I had graduated, it became fully equal in terms of numbers, with parity in the numbers.
that's really interesting, though, when you tell me about the separate admissions and the 4-to-1 ratios. And I think so when you're in high school and you're thinking about college, would the girls in high school have been encouraged equally to go to college, or was that, what did guidance
Yes.
counselors say? What did teachers say to the female students in your high school? What kind of encouragement or not did you get?
So I think there was an encouragement of both the boys and the girls, the males and the females, to go to college. And in fact, a real inspiration for me at the time was a chemistry teacher I had in high school, who was really, really supportive of me going into the sciences. And,
Oh,
you know, and she was a chemist and a woman and teaching chemistry in high school. And she was really encouraging me to stay in the sciences and to, you know, even to consider either going into, you know, one of the basic science, going into chemistry, or going to medical school. You know, she talked about that a little, though I think there were other major inspirations in my life for going to medical school. But she was one of the people who really inspired me to go into the sciences. And that
okay.
was important, having a female, high school teacher in the sciences who was very frequently telling me that she had a lot of confidence in my abilities in science and that I was really good at it. That made a difference to me that I was
Yes.
hearing that in terms of pursuing it and majoring in a science in college.
Yeah. And knowing, which we will get to, sort of what the arc of your career has been, how do you think your parents, beyond school and education, what kind of values, qualities do you think they instilled in you that, have let you overcome challenges and stay determined and have a passion for the things you do? Is that internal to you, or did things in your environment help shape that?
I think my parents were important influences on my life. They, with all of the children, they made us sort of believe in ourselves and believe in our capabilities, and also not to give up, and to make it really clear to us that, there are a lot of hardships in life, but you got to get knocked down, you got to get back up, and
Right.
it can work out really well if you stick to it. And if you have perseverance. It was something that they really tried to cultivate, that you would just be able to persevere and not be derailed by criticisms or failures or, disappointments, to just get back up. And, they made us do certain things that seemed really challenging, like taking us to hills that for sledding that were quite complicated to navigate. And that really, I think, really helped to develop self-confidence. But
Okay.
yeah, my mother was a very major influence in my life. My mother, she was the youngest of 4 children in her family. And I think she always really wanted to be a doctor, but
Oh,
felt that the opportunities really were not available to her, even though she saw that her brothers were able to do exactly what they had expressed an interest in doing with their lives. One was a doctor and lawyer, and they were doing what they were interested in doing. And she went into social work, which I think was a great interest of hers, but she often talked about how she had considered going to medical school and maybe would have liked to pursue it, but it really wasn't an opportunity for her. And I think that really stuck with me, that I'm going to see if I can, make a go of it.
yeah. It's interesting to think about the women's movement in general and just being, one generation apart, what a difference that made in
Big
opportunity and in visions and in possibilities. Yeah.
there were a lot of changes at that time. And even like just my generation, really tremendous changes during that period, like the opportunities available us to pursue sports and do activities that we were interested in, even in high school and college. That was all in a state of transition, was really
Yes.
rapidly changing. But I do think there were differences between my mother's generation and opportunities for women. Many women did break through those barriers, and there are some really amazing stories of women in that generation who did science and won amazing, really pioneering breakthrough research and various types of work, won all kinds of awards. But for the most part, there were some, limitations put on women and their choices in those days. And, it did inspire me that, my mother wanted, I always thought that she wanted to be a doctor. And so
Did she
I
talk
thought
openly about that, about wanting to be a doctor?
she had talked about it. She had talked about how she thought that that would have been difficult for her to actually pursue. And then she started having children and talked about
Yeah.
how she really didn't, think that that would have been feasible, at that time.
Right,
Um,
right.
and so
Yeah.
she was a big inspiration. um she also like was a really big inspiration to me in terms of going into women's health, because my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she died very early in my medical training. So very early in my medical training, and this is now 44 years ago, um, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, advanced ovarian cancer, and died before I really had completed my medical training. So she never actually had a chance to see any of my successes or any achievements in that I had in medicine. However, she has always continued to be an inspiration to me. So even to this day, really throughout the whole process of doing clinical work, doing research, she has been probably the main inspiration to me. And one of the reasons, aside from what we talked about, where I thought that she had always wanted the opportunity to go into medicine, was when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, I realized that there was so little known about how to
Ah,
treat many of these conditions in women, and also so few treatment options available. And this really motivated me to go into the field of women's health and try to help in terms of research, trying to answer some of the key questions, not only in terms of ovarian cancer, because really my focus has been more on cardiovascular disease and diabetes and many of the cardiometabolic kinds of health problems, although I do some research related to cancer as well. But it just became really clear to me that there were many knowledge gaps, and that
that was the
women's
first one that
health.
opened up how big the gaps were
Yeah,
to
so
see it in ovarian cancer. And then,
that was
yeah,
really motivating to me, and it inspired me to pursue a path in women's health, both clinically and research wise. It was a very important inspiration.
yeah, yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. And when you came through high school and you had this inspiration from your chemistry teacher, was it in your mind that you were going to be a doctor, going to go to Radcliffe? And or did you apply to lots of colleges? What was that process like of applications? Did you have a first choice? Were you
I
set on Radcliffe?
I I did apply to a large number. At that time, 7 or 8 seemed like a large number. I think now kids apply to a lot more
Yeah.
colleges than that. Um, but it was my first choice to go to Harvard Radcliffe. And I actually had gotten into some other schools that were also somewhat tempting to me. For example, I got into Princeton. I was accepted at Princeton, and that school would have been the first year that they were accepting women. And I
Oh,
thought
wow.
that would be very like pioneering and maybe interesting to be in the first class of women at Princeton, but decided ultimately to go to Harvard Radcliffe.
And did you know that the application process for Harvard was going to favor 4 times as many boys as girls? Like, were you
Oh,
aware of those
I knew that,
disparities?
I knew that, Radcliffe College had at that time only 300 slots for the freshman
Right.
class for each of the classes. Yes. So
Okay.
I knew, it was much smaller than the overall Harvard freshman class.
Okay. Yeah. And going there, was it a big transition to leave Cleveland and head for Boston? When I hear you say, "Oh, I would have been happy to be one of the first women in a cohort at Yale," it sounds like you weren't
Princeton, yeah, Princeton.
Princeton, sorry, you weren't shy or reticent about being a woman in a minority environment. You would have welcomed that.
I would have welcomed that. I mean, it was a time when things were changing in that way. Yale had just started to admit women into the class about 2 years before that. And my sister, as
Uh-huh.
I mentioned, was at Yale. She was in that first class, and there were a lot of changes that were going
Yeah.
on right at that time with many of these schools. But there are so many great colleges. I mean, it's always a tough decision. But I thought that overall, Harvard Radcliffe was a good choice.
Okay. And what was the transition like to head off to college? Did it feel daunting? Did it feel easy? Was it mostly exciting?
It was very exciting. I had gone to a summer camp the year 2 years before that in Interlochen, Michigan, where I had been away from home for the full 8 weeks
Okay.
of the summer. And I'd sort of gotten through that process of living on my own, being away from home. Actually found it very challenging. It's very, very difficult doing that for the first time for like 8 solid weeks. And
Yes.
so I felt that had really prepared me for going off to college, away from home, and being able to to deal with it. And it
Right.
was, I didn't find it that difficult to be away at college on my own. And I was glad that
Okay.
I had an opportunity to do that.
And did you have roommates there that you were assigned to, or how did that work out? You were on campus in a dorm with roommates,
Yeah,
I'm assuming.
you had roommates, the first year I lived at Radcliffe, and they have assigned roommates, and then after freshman year I moved to the Harvard houses, and so
Okay.
I lived in the Quincy house. I actually met my husband my sophomore year at when I moved to Quincy house, who wasn't my husband then. We lived in separate entryways in where they had all the sophomores living. And eventually the superintendent came and took down the fire door between the two suites where I was living with my roommate and he was living with his roommates. And so we got to know, the guys across the fire door pretty well. And eventually we started dating. And so I've kind of fond memories of
Yes.
living in Quincy house and that experience, because I met my future life partner through that dorm experience.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, that would certainly change the college years a little bit too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we
And did you
didn't
know
marry
were
for a long time after that. It was at least 7 years after that. But
okay?
yeah, we didn't get married during college.
Okay.
But it was interesting, to meet him sophomore year.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you go in knowing you were going to be in the sciences? Did you dabble in the arts? Was your mind made up when you went to college about what your future was? Or was it still exploring?
I was still exploring, but I was certainly thinking about medicine and
Mm-hmm.
being pre-med. Um, and as I mentioned, I was really inspired by my mother to pursue that path.
Yeah.
And I was taking pre-med courses, I was majoring in biology, but I was also taking a lot of courses in literature and social sciences and anthropology.
Uh-huh.
And so it was by no means limiting myself to the science or pre-med courses. But
Yes.
I did kind of solidify my interests in going to medical school by early in the college years, and then I
Okay.
just pursued it.
How do you think having that broad range? I mean, the award is called the Renaissance Woman in Medicine because these are people who have capabilities in the field of medicine and beyond. So you're recognized for that. Do you think having the kind of undergraduate education you had has something to do with that sort of, well, how did it advance you or help you or shape the ways you are in medicine, in science and in clinic?
Yeah, I think that I've always had interests beyond pre-med or medical school and the sciences. I've always really had a lot of interest in the arts and did, as I mentioned, I was taking art classes and at even in Cleveland,
Yeah.
in high school and earlier than that. And then I went for a summer to Interlaken, which is also known as National Music Camp. But my main
Oh,
focus there, my main focus there really was on art and sculpture. Though I
okay.
took some musical, I did play the harp briefly um, at that camp. But I've had a lot of interest in the arts, and I have gone to a lot, spent a lot of time over the years visiting museums and going to performances. When I was in college, I took some pottery classes, potter's
Okay.
wheel, working with potter's
Yeah.
wheel, and also wrote some dance reviews, performance reviews for the school newspaper.
I thought
Um,
I read that somewhere. I was going to ask you about that, that you were
yeah,
writing on arts for the
yeah.
school.
And so I've always, had an interest in the arts. And when I had an opportunity, I would work summers to help make some money and help pay for college. I had jobs, for instance, at the Cleveland Clinic, working with an American Heart Association stipend. I also had jobs working as a waitress,
Uh-huh.
which was really good experience, I'll tell you, in terms of understanding how difficult some jobs can be in terms of how demanding they can be, and the
Mhm.
environment, working environment may not be that terrific. And all of this really motivated me to stick with my plan to
Ah,
be pre-med and to go into medicine, which is a decision I haven't regretted. I really have not regretted that decision. And I also really enjoyed not only clinical practice of medicine, women's health, and I trained in internal medicine and endocrinology, but also the opportunities to do research and particularly randomized clinical trials. This has been really important to me.
mhm. Yeah. It's a broad background. And I wonder if yeah, some undergraduates would feel like, oh, that's taking away from my grade point average in the sciences, and I can't afford to do that. But it's clearly been important enough for you to do that and to be well-rounded, and it feeds
Yeah,
you in different ways, I imagine.
it definitely, it really was more important to me to be, pursuing some of these additional interests beyond the day-to-day classwork, than to have the absolute best possible GPA. It was really more important to me to be pursuing and maintaining some of these outside interests, as well as trying to, follow this path ultimately
Yes.
toward medical school and a degree in medicine, and being able to
Yeah.
do clinical practice was originally my goal, but then it became more of a combining clinical practice and research. Then I also added administrative role as chief of a division of preventive medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
We're going to get there. We'll let that one go for another day. But in what ways was it important? I know you said it was important enough for you to do that, worrying about the absolute great point. What did it give you, this world outside of medicine, alongside medicine, I guess? The things the pottery, the sculpting, in what ways is your artistic life meaningful to you?
Yeah. So I've always enjoyed making things,
Mhm.
I don't know, it's a way to relax. And
Yeah.
I've always like really enjoyed doing drawings. I used to do pastels and painting, and then you can like give it to someone. I never sold my work, but either make it a gift, or even if it's just within the family, like
Right.
I would very often do a
Something
drawing or a
tangible.
painting, and I would give it to my mother, and she would put it up, and in one of the rooms in the house, and that would be very gratifying,
Yeah.
to do something like that. But mostly I really enjoyed the just enjoyed the art and working the hands, and
Yeah.
having some product from that work that you could then like give to someone, or even just enjoy
Uh-huh.
yourself, put it up
Something tangible
somewhere
and
in the
material and
room.
not so cerebral. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And then the process of getting ready for medical school and making those applications and the interviewing for medical school and all of that. How was that process for you?
So that process went well, in that I had been away from home. I had been in Cambridge, Boston, and I thought it might be good to go back home,
Yeah.
and to go to medical school in the Case Western Reserve, which I was actually excited about the idea of it, because it had the school not only be back at home, which I thought might be meaningful to my parents, especially my mother,
Mhm.
for me to be in
Mhm.
medical school there. But it also had a really innovative curriculum where the students had early clinical experiences. Like at the very beginning of medical school, you would
Uh-huh.
be assigned to take care of a patient, a woman during her pregnancy, follow her during the last several months of the pregnancy, be present at her labor and delivery, and help in whatever way possible during that period. And then to follow the infant through at least their first year of pediatric clinics. And I thought that was terrific, because you get that early clinical experience. So from the very beginning of medical school, you're kind of understanding what it's all about, why it
Yes.
matters, and
Yeah.
really motivates you to like learn the material, even take
Yeah.
this even more seriously. I thought that was great. Another aspect of the medical school curriculum that I was looking forward to was this organ systems curriculum where, for example, you learn about a certain part of the body, like the cardiovascular, the heart, and the cardiovascular system, and you study the physiology, you study the pathology, looking under a microscope, looking at what the tissue, the muscle tissue, looks like. You also do anatomy lab, where we would actually be reworking with cadavers and really trying to understand the anatomy and how different parts of the body relates to each other. And then there were clinical aspects of it as well. Some of the clinical conditions that involve the heart and how to treat them. And so it would
Right.
all be integrated. It wouldn't start with just doing something like physiology, totally separate from the organ system.
And was
Like
this different than other medical schools that you had looked at?
it was, there were several other schools that also had a more integrated organ systems curriculum, but it
Right.
was one of the earlier schools to have that. So
Okay.
there were several reasons that I thought that would be a good choice. So I was actually happy to do that.